isn't free, but I still believe in my freedom, so my mind can see.
Harsh accusations against Grant County Sheriff Glenn Palmer. News Channel 21 obtained the complaints filed against Palmer with the state law enforcement licensing agency. Wanda Moore went through some of those documents today, and she joins us now. Wanda, what do they say?
Well, Dan, the complaints came from numerous citizens, the local police chief and the director of the 911 dispatch center, all accusing Palmer of being, quote, a security leak. That's all after his connections with some of the occupiers of the Militia National Wildlife Refuge.
Complaint after complaint coming into the office of the state law enforcement agency, all concerning Grand County Sheriff Glenn Palmer's connection with the armed refuge occupiers. The complaints range from citizens saying Palmer broke his oath to the John Day Police Chief Richard Gray. Gray said he has, quote, great public safety concern when the Grand County Sheriff is allowed to openly meet with and be part of this group of lawbreakers. Palmer expressed in the past that he was sympathetic to the cause of the occupiers. Palmer claimed he never invited them to come to Grand County, but he did a lunch meeting with some occupiers. On January 26, a community meeting was set up by the leaders of the occupation. Palmer was reportedly in attendance in uniform, waiting for Ammon, Bundy and others to arrive, but the group never made it to the meeting. En route, they were arrested and LaVoy Finicum fatally shot. Finicum reportedly said he wanted to see Sheriff Palmer, a close connection that cost Palmer the trust of many in the community, including dispatch director Valerie Luttrell, who says she has, quote, deep concern over the support that Palmer is showing for the militia. In addition to constantly taking calls from people in the community about the situation, Luttrell says Palmer, quote, pushed his personal agenda over the welfare and safety of the general public. She also says Palmer is viewed as a security leak by local law enforcement, the Oregon State Police, and the FBI. Details on the roadblock on January 26 were not shared with Palmer. One dispatcher said, quote, I felt uncomfortable sharing confidential information to someone who may not be trustworthy.
And all of these complaints have been passed on to the Department of Justice for an investigation, and they could potentially revoke Palmer's license as a sheriff. Palmer is up for re-election this November. Dan, back to you.
Hey everyone, this is Gina Harden with Liberty Grows. We're out here protesting, standing with some great patriots today. We're out in front of the Terminal Island Prison in San Pedro, California, where Dwight and Stephen Hammond have been imprisoned. They've been charged as terrorists, but we know they're not. They're hardworking ranchers just trying to provide for their family, provide meat for our hamburgers, for everyone in America. And it's unjust, it's a crime, it's cruel and unusual punishment. The judge himself in their case said that this was cruel and unusual punishment to sentence them to 5 years in prison for an accidental a fire that accidentally burned some land, and actually they said made improvements to the land. No damage was done, yet they were fined $400,000. So we're out here today just protesting and letting the government know that they need to obey the law. They need to submit to the U.S. Constitution, which even here in California is the supreme law of the land. And patriots across America are standing up. We ask you to join with us and stand for liberty.
I got a letter stating that we owed them $52,000. Churches are tax exempt, but they still say we owe them $52,000. And that if we don't pay it by the 3rd of next month, they're going to put a levy on my church building in Buena Park. They're just trying to intimidate us.
I came out here because what has happened to the Hammonds can happen to any American family. I came out here today because of the corruption, because the government is trying to break the Hammonds so they can no longer have a voice, no longer be on their ranch, no longer support themselves, and therefore the ranch belongs to BLM. Steve Grasty and David Ward have done whatever they can to put these innocent Americans in jail.
Do you think the Hammonds have received justice?
No, of course not. You go to jail for a year and a half, then you're back home with your family for 2 years, and then the government says, oh, you know what, you didn't serve enough time, you need to finish your full 5 years. It's double jeopardy.
Hi, thanks for coming out today.
Thanks
What
for
brought you
having
guys
us.
out? Why do you care?
We have been following this since the Oregon Standoff, whatever you want to call that. But we've been following it from there, and we learned about the Hammonds and their horrific story in America that this is happening, and it's just not right. So we've been trying to, do something, but we're unfortunately kind of stuck here. So this was our first opportunity to really come out and be active, and so we're here.
I'm sure the family appreciates you taking the time to come and support them. Thank you. You have anything you want to say?
No, not really too much to say. This is step one. Educate the populace. Get people to know what's going on. Get them to know that the government is at war with you. They are at war with you. It's not a joke. They don't care about you. They don't love you. They hate you. They're using you. So wake up now. Do something about it, because this is step one, and a lot of people don't want step two to happen, but we're definitely willing for that also.
Amen.
Yep.
LaVoy, any thoughts for America on how we can take our country back?
Well, people need to wake up and realize what's going on in the country and start paying attention and stand up and fight for their rights and fight for a position at the negotiation table.
All right, thank you.
Amen.
Taking a look at the latest developments in regards to the Burns, Oregon standoff case. The man you are looking at here is Grant County Sheriff Glenn Palmer. Now, he is currently in the crosshairs as the Oregon Department of Public Safety Standards and Training is asking the Department of Justice to open up an investigation of Grant County Sheriff Glenn Palmer. Now, they have received numerous complaints from the public and others, including dispatchers and the John Day Chief of Police. Now, these complaints are alleging misconduct by Palmer and raising alarm concerning Palmer's association with the leaders of the Refuge occupation. The Department of Public Safety Standards and Training works in conjunction with the Board on Public Safety Standards and Training. They are responsible for training and certifying Oregon's public safety providers, including law enforcement. Now, this is a copy of their letter that they sent to the Department of Justice requesting this investigation into Sheriff Glenn Palmer. The licensing agency has also warned Palmer that if violations of police standards are found, he could face revocation of his police certification. Now, they would not be able to remove him from being the sheriff, as that is a publicly elected position, but they could remove his certifications and force a new election. Now, according to this one-sided article published by Oregon Live, the mainstream media there in Oregon, Palmer has drawn criticism for his association with the armed militants who took over the wildlife refuge and his meeting with some of the occupation leaders. They quoted the John Day Chief of Police, Richard Gray, in his formal complaint that was filed. I have great public safety concern when the Grant County Sheriff is allowed to openly meet and be part of this group of lawbreakers. So right there, he's calling them a part of these armed militants that took over this wildlife refuge. And notice all the key words, all the buzzwords being used here to create your perception of this current situation. Now, according to Valerie Luttrell, the emergency communications manager for John Day 911, she's quoted in her complaint saying Glenn Palmer is viewed as a security leak, not only by local law enforcement staff, but by the Oregon State Police and the FBI. Now, it's important to remember why all of this went down in Oregon to begin with. Due to the federal overreach and the land grabbing that's still taking place, that's still going on, the unjust incarceration of the Hammonds. I think no matter who you are and where you stand on this, we can all agree that the Hammonds do not belong in prison for 5 years, federal prison, and that they're not domestic terrorists. They're just normal people. They're ranchers. Now, regardless of how you feel about the whole Oregon standoff situation, we have said from the very beginning that they were going to use this situation to push their agendas, to push their gun control agenda, to demonize the Second Amendment, demonize the Patriot movement, go after the militias, further push their branding of the domestic terrorism catchphrase and buzzwords. And now it appears that they're coming after constitutional sheriffs. Now, the government and the mainstream media would like you to believe that this sheriff is unfit for his position and that they go just short of calling him a domestic terrorist himself. Now, at this point in time, what they're not telling you is that Sheriff Glenn Palmer of Grant County was one of the first sheriffs to stand up against this administration and their unconstitutional gun control laws that they were trying to push so hard after Sandy Hook. Now, he addressed this letter directly to Vice President Joe Biden himself. As you can see, he's been involved in law enforcement for almost 30 years. He was a U.S. military veteran, and he proudly proclaims that he too has taken an oath of office to defend and uphold the Constitution of the state of Oregon as well as the Constitution of the United States, and he takes his duty and responsibility seriously. And the citizens of Grant County have entrusted and empowered him to represent them. Now, he goes on to state he will not tolerate nor will he permit any federal incursion within the exterior boundaries of Grant County, Oregon, where any type of gun control legislation aimed at disarming law-abiding citizens is the goal or objective. We live in a free society, and firearm ownership and right to defend oneself from becoming a victim of a criminal act or from far-reaching government attempting to enact laws are unconstitutional. As Sheriff of Grant County, I too will publicly state I will refuse to participate and stand idly by while people I represent are made into criminals due to your unconstitutional actions. Now, the sheriffs making a stand against this administration's unconstitutional gun control was widely covered by multiple media outlets. But most interestingly enough, most of the coverage of Sheriff Palmer was provided by Oregon Live. But what they're not telling you about is that in 2015, Sheriff Palmer became the subject of national media coverage again in a highly suspicious incident that was never truly solved. Now, in July of 2015, the FBI investigated at least 20 separate letters received by law enforcement agencies across Oregon. After Sheriff Palmer was hospitalized following the exposure to an unidentified white powder in an envelope, Palmer was exposed to an unknown chemical substance after opening a letter delivered to his office specifically, and had been hospitalized and treated after developing a rash caused by this unknown substance. Now, according to the FBI, the suspicious letters sent to the government offices throughout Oregon did not appear to contain any hazardous material. Now, this despite the records showing that Sheriff Palmer's hospitalization and treatment due to reaction from exposure to the substance in the envelope. Palmer was one of 3 who actually suffered physical reaction and a rash from the exposure to the substance and required hospitalization. Now, Palmer said he didn't see any powder or white substance when he opened the letter, but he experienced a metallic taste in his mouth and felt a tingling in his arms. He thought, oh boy, I better get out of here, go to the hospital to get his blood tested. But when he got there, they went full hazmat on him, stripped him down, and hosed him down. I'm going to give you 4 reasons right now why this federal government is going after Sheriff Palmer. In 2013, Sheriff Palmer landed on the very wrong side of the Obama administration and its federal muscles, with the unapologetic and highly public stand against the proposed disproportionate measures against the Second Amendment. Okay, there's 1. Number 2, Sheriff Palmer was one of the prime targets in a mysterious case of envelopes containing a toxic substance mailed to Oregon law enforcement officers, which were handed over to the FBI for forensic investigation and never saw the light of day. Number 3, Sheriff Palmer has been a strict constitutionalist, a proponent of the separation of powers, pro-local authority versus federal intrusions, with a staunch defender of the sanctity of the Second Amendment, none of which is tolerated by the current federal powers, one enough to land him on the Fed's to be persecuted list. Okay, he is a target just for that alone. Number 4, Sheriff Palmer is now a direct target of the federal government's witch hunt, geared to set an example and destroy the last pockets of resistance and righteousness in the nation of the no longer free. And that's number 4 right there. So not only are they going after the patriots, they're going after the militias, the Second Amendment. They're going to go for those who stand for the Second Amendment here. Those who stand for the Constitution. They're going after sheriffs now. Okay, this is a big, big turn of events here. They're going after anyone and everyone who stands in their way at this point in time. I'm going to be talking more about this later with the author of this article, Sibel Edmonds, as well as Constitutional Sheriff Richard Mack. I'm going to leave a link over here for CSPOA. You guys can learn a whole lot more about this. The CSPOA assembles sheriffs, peace officers, and citizens who understand the grave implications of our eroding constitutional protections. The time is now.
Blocking the roadways. Okay, don't know, wasn't here. Can't say you were doing it. Can't say you weren't doing it. But you're more than welcome to exercise your First Amendment. I know it's one of them.
Right to assemble and petition our government for redress of grievance.
Practice your rights, but you can't block roadways. Not accusing you, saying you were, but we got a call. We got to come out and address it. Okay?
Thank
you.
you.
If you're interested to see why we're here, just maybe look up Hammond, get home or something like that. Yeah, you're free to practice your rights with whatever reason that you want to. That's up to you. All I'm concerned about is safety and that you don't block the traffic and you allow people to go through. So as long as none of that's going on, do what you do. But again, if we get a call again, then then we have to take other measures. But just like I said, just don't be blocking roadways and maintain safety, and we stay out your hair. Okay?
Thank you, sir.
All right.
And in full disclosure, I'm sure they got cameras. If you check the cameras, we have not blocked any road.
I haven't checked any cameras. Like I said, I'm not saying you did do it. I'm not accusing you of doing it. I'm not saying you weren't doing it, but when we get a call, we got to address it.
You know what I've experienced before? Like, someone said that because I was holding a sign that I was doing something, and I wasn't, and they said the same thing. If we get a second call, and I still wasn't doing it, I was just like this, and they go, oh, we got the second call, you have to leave.
Well, I'm not saying if you get a second call that you have to leave. I'm just saying we have to address it.
No, I was just saying that's happened.
Sir, I don't want you to get hurt blocking the roadway.
Okay. I'm not saying you have to stop. I'm just saying we have to address it if there's a second call. Okay?
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right.
There we are, guys. Look at that. Burns International, our interagency. Hello, I know. Been looking at the screen too much. But this is where, right here, there was a lot of blockades and stuff, even up there. They're not here anymore, guys. The FBI has pulled out. I'm going to go check over at the courthouse area, see if they're there. All right, seen this many a times with many a places or many a videos. Look here, guys. This is where the blockade was. It is no longer here. That's the sheriff's office and the county jail. There is, let me get my thumb out of the way again. Oop, sorry about that, guys. There's the, that's the Lincoln Junior High. There's the, Ryder, Penske, I mean, basically, they pulled out.
Hey everyone, this is Spiro. I have two very special guests with me joined today on the line, and we're going to talk about the Oregon standoff here briefly and cover some of the recent developments in regards to what has taken place since the standoff has ended there in just outside of Burns, Oregon. I'm joined by Sibel Edmonds. She is the founder of Boiling Frogs Post, as well as Sheriff Richard Mack, who is the founder of the CSPOA, the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. Got to the point now where they have a sheriff in their crosshairs, and this is Sheriff Palmer out of Grant County, and he is in the crosshairs right now. Department of Justice, I'm sure you're all well aware of, they're going to be potentially investigating him for alleged misconduct. Now, there has been law enforcement officials there in John Day, such as the chief of police, who is one of those accusing this sheriff of this misconduct.
This is a rather scary that has involved Sheriff Palmer, and I know Sheriff Palmer very well, and I've done a lot of work with him over the years. In fact, he was the first sheriff in America to have our constitutional training, and I provided that for him and his entire agency about 15 years ago. But these allegations that have been made against him by some of the folks in Grant County, I really find quite comical, if not entirely laughable, because they have no substance. There's no what they think. What was the complaint? That he might be a security risk. Well, tell me what he's done to be a security risk, and you know, maybe they could involve that. And even if he is a security risk, then involve him with any of your security. And I was in charge of dispatch at 2 different agencies. I was communications director, and I was also, when I was sheriff, entire communications for the county, all police agencies. If a dispatcher came to me and said, Sheriff Mack, we have another sheriff here or another chief of police, and I feel that he is a security risk, if she could not substantiate any reason why he was a security risk except that he received some calls from a couple of militia people, then I would tell her to shut up and go back and do her job. And if she couldn't substantiate it, I might investigate her. And so I would say on its face, the allegations that are being made against Sheriff Palmer, the Justice Department or FBI would have to say, what are you talking about? There would have to be a substantial evidence of wrongdoing on Sheriff Palmer's part. What are they going to do? He's a security risk? How do you investigate that? And what crime is that if you are? You know, Hillary Clinton is a security risk, and they're barely even going after her, and probably won't go after her, even though it's obvious that she has perjured herself and been violator of numerous different high security crimes. So I think this is a joke, and I think the people making the allegations are political enemies of Sheriff Palmer. In fact, somebody last time, I think it was a sergeant or the current chief, actually ran against Sheriff Palmer, and Sheriff Palmer beat him in a landslide. So, of course, they're upset about that, and there's other people that are upset about that wishes somebody else would be sheriff. But this is ridiculous, and if they can't substantiate something a little bit better than we think he's a security risk, which is not a crime, then I think this is all going to be laughed at quite a bit. If you look at a bunch of people being ready to pounce on you like they obviously had, and a roadblock, well, that looks kind of like an ambush. I don't think that's too far a stretch for Sheriff Palmer to say that. And that's not a crime either. Now, another hypocritical and ironic situation that exists here is everything they have accused Sheriff Palmer of doing, Sheriff Ward did to the 10th power. I mean, he did worse than Sheriff Palmer's being accused of. Sheriff Ward in Harney County, where all of this took place, none of this took place in Sheriff Palmer's county. And so if he talks to these people, why not? These people were allowed by the federal government and the sheriff's office and the state of Oregon. The occupiers were allowed to come and go as they pleased. They went into church. They went to town hall meetings. They held town hall meetings. They went to talk to the FBI. They had at least 2 meetings with Sheriff Ward. There's a picture on the internet with Ammon Bundy shaking hands with Sheriff Ward. Why didn't Sheriff Ward just grab him by the hand and take him to jail and tell him he's under arrest? Sheriff Ward never tried at all to place them under arrest. So why is it that Sheriff Palmer is being criticized for anything when Sheriff Ward did nothing except talk to these people? And that's what Palmer is being accused of. So what if they talk to him? Sheriff Ward allowed them to come and go as they pleased. What would be the big deal if anybody talked to him? They were certainly allowed to go into restaurants and to church. And so, you know, it gets a little bit ridiculous when, as Thomas Paine said, we punish on the one hand and pardon on the other. And that's why this is so obviously a political move, whether it's by the federal government or local politics. I don't really know, but it stinks to high heaven of politics. And so it's, the whole thing is just absolutely absurd and ridiculous. And so why don't they go after Sheriff Ward? And not only that, if Sheriff Ward had taken action, these people inside there, including the Bundys, said that the sheriff has ultimate power. They should have put that to the test. And I said that to Sheriff Ward personally. And he had met with Ammon Bundy before they occupied. So he already knew Ammon Bundy, and he knew how Ammon Bundy felt about the power of the sheriff. And then Sheriff Ward refused to investigate them or to arrest them or to tell them to get lost. And Sheriff Ward had complete inaction that I believe led to the death of LaVoy Finicum. And so why didn't he do anything, and why aren't they going after him? Well, you have to know the difference. The only difference between Sheriff Ward and Sheriff Palmer is that Sheriff Palmer is a constitutional sheriff and Sheriff Ward is not. That's the only difference. But they both met with these people, and I will tell you that Sheriff Ward did so in much greater extent than did Sheriff Palmer.
They were throwing pennies out in front of his office out there saying that he sold out.
Yeah, let me add something there. That is true. And I was there at that point when we did that, and it was a very beautiful protest and rally. It wasn't a protest. Well, it was a protest and rally for the Hammonds, who have been obviously charged criminally by our own criminal federal government. And I will tell you that when I was sheriff, and many other sheriffs across this country have experienced the same thing from the Forest Service and the BLM, who have had controlled burns that have got out of hand and that have burned private property as well as public property, and they've burned down half the side of our mountain because of their ineptness in executing controlled burns. And controlled burns are necessary to properly maintain a forest. And so here again, Thomas Paine looks prophetic when he says, why do we pardon on one hand and punish on the other? Why hasn't, in all the dozens, if not hundreds of cases where the federal government has done exactly what the Hammonds have gone to prison for? And the Hammonds, you need to understand, everybody listening to this program needs to understand, they were already charged, they were already tried and convicted, they had already served time in prison, a few months to a year for both Steve and Dwight, and they had already paid $400,000 in fines, and all the other ranchers there who loved the Hammonds so much got together and raised the money for their ability to pay the fines. These were friends and neighbors of the Hammonds who raised that money. All the fines have been paid, they had served their time, and then the federal government comes in and says, well, we can make all this go away if you'll just give up your land. And so they refused to do that, and then the next thing you know, they've got some idiot judge to say, oh yeah, they didn't get enough. Well, the first judge said this would be cruel and unusual punishment, a violation of the Eighth Amendment, if these defendants were put in jail for the time that that the federal government wanted in the first place. So he refused to do it. And then they go around that judge, go to the most liberal overturned court in America, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and they say, oh yeah, send them back to prison more. That wasn't enough. Well, then we need every sheriff, and I'm challenging every sheriff to look at the times in their counties all across this country when the BLM has done controlled burns that have gotten out of control. And I also want the EPA arrested and charged, the agents that allowed the toxic waste to be dumped into the Colorado and Animas rivers in Colorado just a few months ago. So let's start getting serious about this, and let's charge everybody equally on all of these crimes.
I also want to mention, I'm a woman. I know the mainstream media liberals want to make that these are the anti-women, okay? And I don't know, I have olive skin. I come from a bunch of countries that are, considered Middle Eastern and of different religion. And I have to tell you, living under tyranny in those countries in some way was not as bad as what I see happening to this country.
Absolutely.
While we lived under tyranny, everybody agreed that we were under tyranny. Nobody pretended otherwise, and there was always this hope for some sort of change or revolution to overturn a certain monarchy, erect democracy, maybe emulate something like Constitution. This is far more dangerous because you're looking at the majority living under the assumption that their constitution still holds true and that they are the nation of the free and that this is a government, federal government, that operates based on the notion of we the people, a government of the people, for the people, by the people, and that lulls them to the sleep and say we can sit back and let them handle things and they are putting up with everything. So this is far more dangerous than be under, living under an overt tyranny. So now the fact that you're planning hundreds of sheriffs, okay, with their impeccable records, pro-constitution rallying, I think is going to go a long way. If it's covered by the media, I know that they're going to censor it, but we are here and there are some alternative media outlets who will cover that to undo some of the damage the mainstream media has done to the voices of dissent and to show that, are you going to consider these guys thugs? Okay, you're looking at hundreds of sheriffs and they're marching and they're saying enough is enough. Because I don't know how long we can wait. We have been waiting and everything has gotten worse and worse and worse. And now all the constitutional liberties and rights that we've had are considered certain privileges that sometimes may be granted to us to exercise rather than absolute rights given to us under the law that is supposed to be governing this nation. And the founding fathers, when they came up with this constitution, when they put it together, they didn't say we are putting together a set of laws for this nation that are going to be conditional or circumstantial. These were absolute laws of this land. So to say we are going to suspend First Amendment during the war on terror, we're going to go ahead and take away the Second Amendment when we see some crisis, couple of those, who knows how many of them are real, how many of them are made up. Well, that is acting as the enemy of the Constitution. And I took the oath. I work for the government. This is a country that I chose. The other ones, I was born into them. I was taken by my family. This one I chose. I took that oath, and I'm taking that oath seriously. And that oath says, it doesn't talk about any enemies across the borders. It specifically says those enemies of the constitutions, the enemies that threaten constitution. And it upholding that oath and saying we will fight against those enemies. And I'm looking around, whether it's Al-Qaeda, whether it's ISIS, whether it's whatever it is, none of them are really threatening our constitution. We need to fight them. But the only threat that I have seen, and I'm not an expert, okay, but I'm coming from different countries, the only threat, the only assaults that I have seen on the Constitution have come from the federal government.
But the FBI has basically left Burns Hines area, but they are still out here at the refuge.
I have to say something today. Law, liberty, justice, our Constitution, and what America is supposed to represent. It's not bravado, it's not bragging, it's not pride. It's not running around saying how tough we are, or how we're not going to take any guff from anyone. It's not pointing the finger at everyone else except ourselves. Liberty isn't saying, look, all these other terrorists are causing the problem when we allow our own government to be the greatest terrorists. Justice isn't saying, well, we don't like them, so let's go carpet bomb them. God hates our shedding of innocent blood. From the unborn to the aged. We wave flags and we have barbecues and rallies. And we let corrupt politicians who tickle our ears. And we say, God bless America, but we refuse to bless God. This isn't law. Law is simple, it's principled, and it's beautiful. My rights and your rights and our children's rights, they're not from the Constitution, they're from Yahweh. They're natural, they're for everybody. Even the ones that don't believe like me or like you. It doesn't matter what race or what color of their skin. Doesn't matter what religion they're of. What matters is individual actions. Loving your neighbor in the defense of life, liberty, and property for all equally. Oh, how often I'm hearing patriots saying things like, well, we should just kill all them, or they don't get rights, they're not Americans. I'm sickened by the lies and the hatred coming from people calling themselves Christians and calling themselves patriots. Friends, we have to stand united for liberty. While at the same time saying our government is abusive, we support abusive government and those who abuse at the hand of judges and politicians, and we try to say they're heroes and they're mostly good even as they abuse us. It's not about hating anyone, friends. Most of the civilianry of America is not mostly good. We're failing to defend our children's birthright. And so are most of our politicians and most of our police. It's not about pointing the finger at any one person. It's about pointing the finger at ourselves. It's about realizing we need to repent. We need to stop hating everyone as a solution to our own failures. America is no longer the greatest country in the world, friends. There's third world poor nations that we look down on that have more civil rights and that treat the innocent, the weak, the fatherless, and the widow far better than our own government, our own law enforcement, our own judges, and our own people. We're a nation that was built on the idea of liberty for all, built on the idea of compassion and people coming here to find a better place, and we're making it a worse place. We're destroying this nation. We're electing evil, wicked men to rule over us. But it's not just from one party or from the other party, it's from both of them. So we look at one party and we say this is their fault, so we elect wicked men from our party and say, well, now it's going to be fixed. We blame the race, or we blame the religion, or we blame that guy down the street, or that theology, or that belief, and it's a lie. The problem lies with us. Because God doesn't bless a nation that curses him. And so America, we can point the finger in a lot of directions. But at the end of the day, we look at patriots all over this nation. We look at our patriots in Oregon. We look at government murdering men like LaVoy, Finicum. And we look at the rest of the government, who we call mostly good, do nothing to stand against it. See, that's not a good government. That's a government that's failing to do what we paid them to do. What they swore to do. That's an employee who is failing to defend the rule of law and to protect the liberty that the people laid down in this government by the consent of the governed, which has become wicked because we, the people of this nation, consented to wickedness. And so we need to ask, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to step up and love our neighbor and start showing up and start helping and stop making excuses and stop dividing with every faction and race and group and try and work through things and unite and stand on principle, not on faction, not on supporting people because of their color or their group or the uniform they wear, but supporting liberty and principle alone. Loving our neighbor as ourselves. We need to start blessing God. And then it's my belief that God will bless America.
Everybody, here's a story that everybody should be interested in right here. This could get very, very interesting. There was a video that LaVoy Finicum came out with about a year ago, early last year, where he was talking about all of the things that were going on between him, the BLM, the Wildlife Service, and how he was standing up to what they were doing to him. He also mentioned in one of those videos of his about another rancher that was also standing up in his area Stanton Gleave. Now, LaVoy Finicum mentioned about how Stanton Gleave owns a lot of ranching territory or ranching lands, and that the Wildlife Service was putting him through a lot of hell. Well, this story right here out of Paiute County, Utah, is talking about a sheriff who happens to be the nephew of Stanton Gleave. Here is that story. Second smallest county by population in Utah, Paiute County is making a lot of noise in the Western land movement these days. Longtime rancher Stanton Gleave is at the center of a conflict that includes the county sheriff on one side and the U.S., not the Wildlife Service, but the U.S. Forest Service on the other. Gleave wore his cowboy hat and held up a pocket edition of the U.S. Constitution as he spoke with a rural caucus of the Utah State Legislature February 12th. These federal people have no right to be here if you follow the Constitution, Gleave said. The Paiute County Sheriff, Marty Gleave, we're told, is Stanton Gleave's nephew. We're not taking no more cuts on the mountain. I'll deputize every man, woman, child in the county to stop what's going on, the sheriff said, referring to Monroe Mountain, where the Forest Service has taken grazing permits from his uncle, Stanton Gleave, and another rancher, Keith Anderton. The Forest Service is working to revitalize aspen growth on Monroe Mountain. 74% of the land in Paiute County is controlled by the Bureau of Land Management and the Forest Service. This could get very, very interesting. We've already seen a story of another sheriff in another location where he stood up to the Food and Drug Administration and their attempts to really go after a raw milk producer, and the sheriff would not let them harass that milk farmer any longer. The FDA was hounding him, putting him through inspection after inspection, and that sheriff said, enough is enough. Get the hell out of my county. Well, we are going to see what is going to happen here is exactly that this sheriff of this small little community, this small little county, he is the law of the land right there. If he tells that Forest Service to get the hell out, well, then they better get the hell out. I'd like to see how this is going to play out. This is going to get very interesting if you ask me. All right, everybody.
On Wednesday, the leaders of the 6-week armed occupation of the Oregon Wildlife Refuge had their arraignment hearing. The militants were charged with conspiring to impede federal officers who were trying to maintain control of Mallard Wildlife Refuge, while the ranchers fought to take control of land in the western part of the refuge. Ammon, Bundy, and the other anti-government militants during the takeover of the Mallard National Wildlife Refuge in eastern Oregon appeared in the Portland court on Wednesday. 4 of the 16 armed protesters have already confirmed that they plan to plead not guilty to the charges.
These are good people who stood by a family who's in prison today also, the Hammond family.
our family was called out to sing, to encourage the people. And that's why we're here. We're here because these people are standing for something righteous. They're standing for godliness, and they're standing for our Constitution, constitutional rights, and those justices haven't been made. In fact, a man was killed. And our freedoms have already been fought for and paid for by blood before. They shouldn't have to be paid for by blood again. But if that's what it takes, then that's what a man did. Unfortunately, our government and our authorities have usurped their authority, and they've even endangered my own daughter and attempted to murder her. And I hope that some of y'all will put this truth out, because we've seen enough mainstream media not put the truth out. The truth needs to be known, because the truth shall set you free. If there's anything I want to say is you all better turn to God, everybody, because God is the only one that's going to be able to make justice in this particular day and age where evil's prevailing, because that's an evil power that has done what they have done. But God is greater, and that's the faith that our family has, a faith in that greater God, and justice will be made, I promise.
Ammon Bundy and his fellow militia members have pleaded not guilty to crimes associated with their occupation of a federal wildlife refuge earlier this year. Bundy and 24 other activists organized or participated in the 41-day armed standoff at the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. Located in eastern Oregon, many of the armed militia members came from out of the state. A total of 16 people pleaded not guilty on Wednesday, and the rest of the cases are still moving forward. After the occupation ended, FBI officials across the West rounded up additional defendants.
LaVoy was shot dead in Oregon a few weeks ago by authorities. You may remember seeing it. It was on television quite often, but unfortunately the media has forgot about the story. I have not. Unfiltered has not, Newsmax has not, and we are going to continue sticking with this story and things about the BLM. On the phone with me right now, making her first, if you will, media appearance since the death of her husband, is Jeanette Finicum. Jeanette, thank you for taking the time and being so brave in joining me today.
Thank you, Dennis, for having me.
Okay. Last night you and I spoke about this interview, and I asked you first and foremost about the autopsy results that you received back because the family hired somebody to do a private autopsy. You told me that you could not share the results of that autopsy until the feds released theirs. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and I will respect that, and I think everybody else watching does as well. That being said, you also told me that your lawyer was up in Oregon. And I asked you, hey, is he going to check out the SUV that LaVoy was driving? And you told me?
I said that he was denied access to view the truck and will not be able to unless we go further with other legal matters.
How are you ever going to know what exactly happened that day if your lawyer does not have access to information such as what took place with that truck?
Well, I don't have to know all the ins and outs legally. I know who my husband is, and I know who he was, and so I know what happened in his final moments. I know what kind of man he was. My children know what kind of man he was, and so we can rest assured and know those things for ourselves.
All right, well, let me ask you, Jeanette, let me ask you a question. I want to take you back to that snowy day in Oregon. You say that you know your husband, and there's no doubt you'll know him better than anybody else does. What happened? Why did your husband drive towards the men and then veer off to the snow? I mean, in your estimation, you've seen the video. What do you think took place?
I think that when he took off, he was trying to get to the sheriff's. He said as much. And as he was going around the curb, I don't believe he expected a roadblock. He had to make split-second decisions. He had to decide whether to go to the right or go through the middle or turn to the left, where it seemed to be the least risky. And so I believe that in those couple of seconds he chose to go that direction to save the people in the truck. I know that he dashed out to diffuse the situation. I know that with every part in my soul. I know that. I know that he was trying to protect those two women and Ryan Bundy in the back seat of that truck. Nobody runs out of their truck with their hands up expecting to be shot. You know, what is it that our country has turned into? Do we believe that mere words justify the use of deadly force? Do we believe that peaceful actions justify the use of deadly force? Do we believe that two hands up in surrender justifies the use of deadly force?
You know, go ahead, Janae. I was going to ask you a question. Do you believe that your husband was murdered?
I believe he was taken out.
You do?
Yes, I do.
Why do you think, I tend to agree with everything that you say. I mean, I didn't know LaVoy, so I can't attest to what you're saying about the fact that he was the sort of man who would protect the other people in his car before himself. But in talking to you, I'm going to take your word for it because you seem like one of the most honest people I've ever spoke to on the phone. I told you that last night. And so in that being said, I watched this video and I see a man, if I'm taking your description of him, which is a man who's going to worry about the people who are in that car before he worries about himself. And so he jumps out, he's got his hands up, he's in deep snow, and I don't believe he was reaching for a gun. Do you believe he was reaching for a gun?
No, I don't believe that. I don't believe that. I believe that there were other things going on that we won't know until we have sound. We won't know until we have further information, and which we are actively working on getting. And we are going to move forward and are actively engaged in pressing forward with a wrongful death suit.
Because you think, why do you think he was taken out, using your words?
Yeah, and maybe that's a poor choice of words. I believe that he was killed, and I believe that it wasn't necessary for him to be killed. I believe that he had his hands up, he was surrendering. I've heard from so many different people that the hard stop that was there, the kill stop they call it, wasn't necessary. These people weren't doing anything illegal, maybe a misdemeanor and fleeing from the first stop, but they had an ambush blockade style stop, and here they are saying that they were stopped just because they had a traffic stop. You don't have a traffic stop and go around the corner and have that hard stop, kill stop that they call it, blockade. You don't do that for a normal traffic stop. So I believe that they were out there, they were prepared, they had thought this through, they had trimmed tree lines, they had done all of these things to make sure that whoever came through there did not make it through. And by the grace of God, those three people that were in the back of that truck were saved. They were saved. And I believe my husband had a great deal to do with that. By jumping out of the truck with his hands up, trying to defuse the situation.
I have 5.5 minutes left. I want to get a bunch of other things in here. Yes or no, and a little description if you like. Was your husband a violent man?
No, he wasn't. He didn't so much as even have a traffic ticket on his record. He never went over the speed limit. He always talked to me about keeping the speed limit. He was a kind, loving, gentle man. He was giving of his time to our family and to others, and whoever needed him, he was always there.
Let me change direction for 1 second. I want to talk about the impact this has all had on you. You have a ranch in Arizona, am I correct?
Yes.
Are you now, are you alone there?
I am with my youngest daughter, who's still in high school. She's a senior this year.
So it's just you and your daughter?
Yes.
How are you going to take care of the ranch without LaVoy?
That's a difficult one. That's something we're still trying to put together and trying to put a plan together and trying to figure out how to manage that.
Is your world, I mean, you sound very strong on the phone, which, amazing. Is your world, is your world shattered?
Our world is completely different. Our world, there's so much of us that left that day with him. And there's so much that he did and took care of, and there's so much of him that is missing in all of us now, and so much that we will not have the opportunity to have with him. Our grandchildren will not know him, and it's been an overwhelming sorrow. But I have the gift that God has given me, the surety of knowing that I will be with him again someday. And I'm grateful for my belief in God and in the plan of happiness, and that we will have eternity together. But, you know, being here on earth by yourself is a very difficult thing to do.
We only have 3 minutes left, so I want to try to get in as much as we possibly can. When you're alone at night and you're thinking about his absence, do you wish that he didn't go to Oregon, or are you still do you still stand behind what he did?
I stand behind my husband 100%.
I asked you last night about the BLM and fines that you owe them, and they are going to come after those fines eventually. You know it, I know it. And I asked you if it means to have to save your ranch and to be able to pay your bills, will you pay those fines to the BLM?
I haven't made that decision yet. But I can't, in all good conscience, see myself doing something different than he did. But I have not made a final decision about what I'm going to do.
What do the American people, what do they not know about the Bureau of Land Management?
Well, I think they're learning a lot right now, where they are an overreaching, unconstitutional organization. They have no authority, yet they have been given the authority to go in and police us out there on the range. And I think that we, as the American people, need to stand up and put our government back in check within the confines of the Constitution.
We have 1 minute left. I mean, yesterday all over the internet there were stories about the FBI was closing in on you and they were going to take your cattle and they were going to shut you down. Was that just rumor, or is there really activity going on? And by the way, we have less than a minute.
That was a rumor. However, it was a credible person telling me about that, about the trucks heading out my direction, and so we had to check it out. It was very nerve-wracking there for a minute, but we were able to find my cows safe and sound. And I just have to say really quickly how much I appreciate everybody who has stood by our family and has supported us and came to my aid yesterday. I was so amazed at all the people that came to help, and I just want to thank you. I want to thank all of you.
I have less than 30 seconds. You've got to tell me this in 20 seconds, Jeanette. When you take a look at the way the media has covered your husband's story, not including us, are you disappointed? 10 seconds.
Yes, I am disappointed in the way they portrayed such a good man.
And how?
Because he doesn't fit their narrative.
And what is their narrative?
Terrorist.
Terrorist. Thank you, Jeanette. We'll have you back. Good luck to you. Don't go away. We'll be back.
The Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me.
Ammon, Bundy, and 15 fellow defendants have pleaded not guilty to current federal conspiracy charges in the 41-day protest that took place in Burns, Oregon last month. Militia National Wildlife Refuge was overtaken January 2nd by an armed militia group, including Bundy and 2 family members, in the demand that federal government turn public lands over to local control. The trial is currently set for April 29th, though, according to Assistant U.S. Attorney Ethan Knight, further indictment and charges are likely, and a new trial date will usurp.